I'm just chuckling because every time I get to a point or picking up a point, the video ends. I don't see the little timer because I slide the thing down so I don't have to see myself talking. I'm just looking at scriptures and notes. So anyway, Moses turns into the fire, and I'm sorry, he fastens his look on the fire, and he says, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. So I made the case that most people would not react this way in capacity, but also in choice. And so Moses is so extraordinary, and he says, not only can he stand there and stare at the fire, but his first thought is, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And it is of vital importance that you gain a greater understanding of the diversity of people that inhabit this earth. It is very important. Because, as Jesus said, if you judge yourself by the goodness of others, you will, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm confident that if he were here today, he would have no problem with me saying this as if it's a quote. He said, if you judge yourself by the goodness of others, you'll always come short of my goodness, because they're not as good as me. You have to judge yourself by the goodness of God. And what you see as the goodness of God is not the actual goodness of God. It's the degree to which you've come to understand the goodness of God so far in your conscience, your idea of God, your idea of the ideal, which if you live your life properly will extend and amplify every day of your life. And you might not notice that that happens, it co-occurs with you becoming a better person, because you can only perceive just beyond how you are. You can see everything beneath and only a little above. But Moses was a tremendous person, and truth always leaves clues, right? And I've given you arguments from the scriptures about the diversity of people here in this series of videos. But you would probably not turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. So, even though Moses could stand in the presence of this bush and not collapse like Daniel would have, or die like someone less than Daniel would have immediately, he still knew there was something very strange about this bush, that this was not a normal thing. And his reaction to it wasn't to ignore it, ghosting it. It wasn't to be offended, like, wow, this is something I've never seen in my life before. I better ignore it, because I feel bad that, I used to think I was hot stuff in Egypt, and here's real hot stuff, and I just would rather not wrap my head around that. The urge of his innate being was, I need to find out why this bush is not burned, which also reveals that he was not just seeing something, he was processing it. He was actually actively thinking about it. I heard a statistic that says something like 50% of people don't have an internal monologue, and I don't know if that's true, but they sure act that way. So there's so much around us, and we just go through it like brainless robots, automatons. There's so much to process. And you could say we're saturated because it's a technological age with information everywhere. All right. But if I teleported you back in time to Jesus's time, do you know those people were doing the same thing? They were doing the same thing. Jesus came and he said, I've done things that no one else has ever done. I've taught things that no one else has ever taught. And you cast it aside as a thing of naught. And if you do acknowledge it, you say, I do these things by the power of the devil, without any reason to believe that could even be possible. And that was his daily experience with these impenetrably hard, difficult, hypocritical, dishonest cowards. And that wasn't something special about those people at that time. It's a human nature property. So let's have courage to look at the fires. Let's have honesty to say, boy, this is different. And let's have desire towards God so that we turn and walk towards the fire. But Moses was not just saying, this is something I want to go figure this. Why the bush is not burned. He said, this fire should be causing things to burn, and it's not, and I want to find out why. And then we'll tie this up here for Moses. It says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. And then the experience continues. But let's pause here. There are so many things that God wants to do to you, for you, and through you that you are not allowing him to do because he's waiting for you to turn aside to see. He already lit fires in your life, and you just walk by them. A lot of times you get angry because he dared to do such a thing, or just because it is. Maybe you're not acknowledging his hand in it. It's unlikely you are. It goes step by step by step, folks. Okay? So let's keep reading. He said, draw not nigh hither. So do you hear the call and the answer in all this, right? God sends a fire. Well, first, God destroys Moses' life and sends him to Midian because that's what needed to happen. And he told him you're going to be this deliverer, but he didn't tell him how. And it just so happens that he had to go to this place and experience this loss of all earthly things for who knows how long before he was just doing his thing. He thought what must that have been? What was I delusional? No, he was right on the track the whole time. The path to God is not the yellow brick road to Oz. It's not really clear to everyone without even thinking about it, and you couldn't deny that you're on it or not. I mean, it is when you know, but you have to learn to recognize some really hairy things as the exact process of God taking you to the promised land, right? So he's in the backwaters of Midian with a bunch of sheep, and he sees this bush, and that was the next step. God provides a bush. Moses turns aside. God calls him out of the bush. Moses says, here am I. All of these things had to happen because they're steps. And God just sits there with breadcrumbs. He's just sitting there trying to get us to come along with him, right? Because he can't come out and say A, B, C, D, because we'd die or we'd get angry at him. Do you know that the greater the righteousness, the less likely a person is to see it as such? Do you know that the greater the glory that God shows you, the less likely you are to see it as glory? That might be dumbfounding to you and just totally blow your mind, but it's true. It's true. We're the ones who are limiting him, and we're limiting him because there's so much to who and how he is that he has to lead us along like brainless little sheep in the beginning and just feed us so slowly so we can come up and understand things little by little, line upon line. And every step in that path is super important. The current step you're on is the most important step there is because it's the last one that you've come up to, right? And everything ahead hangs on how you handle yourself in this current nexus, this current coal face, right? The current thing, current step you're on. And it might be a 4-minute step. It might be a 40-year step. It might be a lifetime step, right? The process is very long. So Moses says, here am I. God says, don't come here until you take your shoes off, because this is holy ground. And by the way, I'm the God of thy father, the God of Abraham. I'm not trying to minimize this. We've gone deep. I need to skim a little. Okay? It wasn't until God said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, that Moses hid his face, and he was afraid to look upon God. And I know what that is like. So then he connects what Moses had experienced previously with his life, with what is right now, and now we're done with Moses for today. So I want to just keep drilling on reactions to truth. There's one more idea I need to tell you about. Okay. So I wanted to go into this step by step before we move on. I wanted to go through John chapter 9, which is the story of the man born blind. This is a really important chapter. Maybe I can give this to you and ask you to read it. I really encourage you to do so. And if you're the kind of person that all you'll do is watch videos, then whatever, there's not much I can